So I read A Little Life by Hane Yanagihara a little over a month ago, back in December 2015, and it instantly became one of my favorite books. It actually made it into it actually was my favorite book of 2015. You can go and check that out in my Best Books of 2015 video. And ever since I finished reading it, it has stayed with me, and I've been able to reflect back on it and just think about it constantly. And I've been really interested in making a review, but honestly, I don't really see the point in making a review, a proper review, on a book that has already been talked a lot about in YouTube and everywhere by people that are far more eloquent and coherent and that can express their views more concisely than I do. So I'm not really going to review this book, like explain the plot and, analyze very deeply into it. I just wanted to say some things that I've reflected back on now that, I've had like a month or so to think about this book, and I've also been really interested in talking about it because I've seen a lot of people, a lot of really, really good booktubers, and by good booktubers I mean people that I really trust and whose opinion I really value, such as Jen Campbell, Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings, talk about this book in a very negative way, and their reviews are fantastic. I loved the reviews, even though I disagree, or at least my experience was different. But I've been really interested as to why people that I really trust as far as reading taste and reading experiences goes, have people who have the same taste as I do in general have had such an opposite reaction to a book that I have deeply cared for and deeply loved. And I've been thinking about this, and I think I can see why, or at least I can talk about it if you don't mind. So this is not a review. This is completely spoiler-free, so feel free to watch in case you haven't read it and are planning on reading it. I just wanted to rant and discuss a little life. First of all, I have always been of the opinion that A Little Life is a book that is not perfect. It's not without its flaws by any means. It's not a very well-crafted book. I think it's definitely a book that it's a hit or miss. People who really read it properly can either love it or hate it. It's not a meh, I liked it kind of book. It's a very emotional book, and that means that you can get really attached to the characters and you can get really invested in the plot and all those things like me. Or you can get deeply frustrated, annoyed about everything, like the people that I mentioned. And I think those things are completely okay and completely valid. Now, I think I can understand, or I can at least try and begin to understand why this difference of opinion has happened. I think that what Mercedes, in her review, which I'll try to link down below, what Mercedes says in her review of A Little Life is very true. She says that the writing is not particularly good. Well, actually she hated the entire thing, but the writing might not be very good. That's true. I don't think the writing is particularly, eloquent or beautiful, or that's not really the aspect, or it doesn't really have the quality of great writing, and I agree with her. She also has issues with characters and the character development, and I do believe, actually, that the way the characters are presented, the way that the reader starts creating the character in their mind, and the way that the character develops is not the best way, it's not the deepest way, it's not the most careful way to develop characters. And probably the biggest issue that people tend to have with this book, besides the writing and the characters and all that, is the plot, and the fact that the plot is sometimes too long, sometimes it's overly descriptive for no reason, so it becomes tedious and dry and unnecessary, and I agree with that. And most importantly, the fact that A Little Life is, as you probably already know, so no spoilers here, it's about a man called Jude St. Francis, and he has a very tragic life. He has had to endure all sorts of abuse, all sorts of tragedies, and he's been miserable, and he hates himself. And as you know, this book delves into some pretty gruesome topics such as self-harm, abuse, drugs, alcoholism, just pretty much everything, and death. Suicide is also a big topic in this book, loss of everything. And yeah, so this book is about the life of Jude St. Francis, and what people seem to be really unnerved by is the fact that Hanya Yanagihara takes it a little bit too long, and I agree. I think it's a complete exaggeration. I think it would never be real. It's a completely unrealistic book. There's no way, or there's a very slim possibility that so many, just such a huge quantity of tragedies could happen to one person in, less than 50 years or 40 years or whatever. So I agree. Now, why did I like this book so much, and why was it really my favorite book of the year if I can criticize it so much? Because I do, I can definitely criticize it. I think it was for several reasons. First of all, I think it was because I read it with the right mentality and in the right frame of mind. I think when I was reading it, I was not really expecting a lot. So I just started reading it. Also, I was in my, I read it during my holiday break, so I had all day long to read, and I was just reading. I was just absorbing everything. I could get into the words and the story very easily, even though it was quite slow for the most of it. I had no problem getting into it. I did find that there was a lot of unnecessary detail, however, and I did not like that. But it also didn't affect me. I was just, well, this could have been edited out, but I don't mind. I don't care that much. But what was I saying? I completely lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, the other thing that I think is most importantly what made me really love this book is that I never expected it to be a realistic story. I never expected it to be real. I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but to me, I think this book is a fairy tale. It's a very long, very tedious, very dry sometimes adult fairy tale, but it is. It feels like a fairy tale. It's definitely to me, like a modern New York kind of fairy tale about loss and death and tragedy and friendship and human connections and the weirdness of life. And I always read it through that lens of, oh, I'm reading a fairy tale. When I knew that there's no way that so many horrible things could happen to one human being, so realistically I wouldn't believe it. But still, I never cared about that, because to me it was a fairy tale. So it was like reading like Rapunzel or Snow White or the Frog Prince or whatever. I never read it under literary fiction eyes. I read it more like in a fairy tale type of way, if that makes any sense. So I never really cared about, the realistic factor. I guess that's what I want to say. And I got really attached to that by reading it like it was a fairy tale. And yes, if you go and check out Mercedes's review, which you really should, it's a great review. You will find that she was, and many people have been, incredibly annoyed and frustrated by this book, and it is a deeply unnerving, unsatisfying, just annoying, frustrating book. To me, that was what made it for me. That's what made me click with this book. Precisely all those things. I think it's a personal thing. In the end, you will like it or not. Depends on many different factors of who you are, what you've read, what you like to read, the personal moment you are in at the moment of reading this. So I could not say I recommend it to you. I could not say I don't recommend it to you. It worked for me, and it was my favorite book of the year. I still look at the cover and it just fills me with so much emotion, and I have great memories of these characters, and the plot, like a fairy tale, really worked for me. Like a literary fiction book, it just fails. But to me, it feels like a fairy tale, like a very weird, fucked up, sorry for my beautiful language, fucked up, urban, modern, New York, obscure kind of fairy tale for adults. So I don't know if that's something that you, if you've read it, have also thought about, but that's why I loved it, and that's why I still believe this was my favorite book from last year, even though I've been able to criticize it so much as well. And there was another thing that I really wanted to say, and I've completely forgot about it. Oh yes, I remembered. Another reason why I believe I loved this book so much is because of my profession and my field of study. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I am a training psychoanalyst. And this book, I think, offers a lot of things and a lot of insight and a lot of material to be thought about in a clinical psychoanalytical way. I'm not going to go into much detail here, but there are some key concepts and some key ingredients in this book that could really be explored by psychologists and people related to psychology, like psychoanalysts. Particularly the concepts of themes that run throughout the novel, such as death, loss, suicide, the way that these people are bonded together by pain and loss. And there's a concept in psychoanalysis that I always talk about and that I always think about, which is called projective identification. And something that I really loved about this book is how that mechanism of projective identification is running throughout the novel. It's at the very core of this novel, because what happens in A Little Life is, to summarize it without spoiling it, we have a character who is cast away, disregarded completely from the beginning of his life. He is neglected by everyone and abused by everyone. And it's really interesting because even though it seems unbelievable, this keeps happening, and it keeps happening, and it keeps happening until the very end of the novel. And it was really interesting to me. Why does this keep happening? I know it's not realistic. I know it's a fairy tale in my head, but why? And I think it's very interesting to think about those things from projective identification. I know that the majority of people who read A Little Life are not psychoanalysts and are not familiar with these concepts and these ideas that are very exclusive of the psychoanalytical field. But to me, that's also something that really made it interesting. So there you go. That was my little rant discussion on A Little Life. If you have anything you would like to comment, please let me know. I would love to discuss this because I really think it's an important book. I think it's really valid to have loved this book or hated it, but it's always important to know exactly why that might be. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.